Hey everybody, so in this tutorial we are going to go through why we're going to use Unity or why we're going to look at it. I'm going to show you how to add sound into Unity. I'm going to show you how to add a quick Blender object into Unity. And I'm going to go through some of the examples that we're going to look at in class and tell you how they work a little bit. So first off, the reason we're going to be exploring Unity in this class is because it allows us to place sounds three-dimensionally in a world, which is not insubstantial. We can create essentially virtual sound structures and sculptures by allowing ourselves to mix aspects of a song by moving through them. So that's why we're going to explore Unity really quickly. And in order to do that, let's talk about very briefly what we're looking at. So right now we're going to look at the Unity interface. And essentially, what we have here is we have this hierarchy and we have this folder down here, and then we have this window. Now, just like in Blender, this hierarchy allows us to see all of the things that are inside of our scene. We have this floor, we have this light, we have this player. If I click inside of this player by clicking on this little triangle, you'll see that I have something like a main camera, and I have this ground check thing. You don't need to worry about those. I've set up the player for you. But this is everything that is inside of our game world. You'll also see that down here, I have a series of folders, and these folders are everything that we have access to that we could put in our game world if we wanted to. This is all of the materials that we're working with. So if we wanted to add a sound into here, we would bring it into our library of sounds, and then we would add it onto an object. And then again, this window over here is the details of all the things that you're clicking on. So for directional light, just like Blender, you'll see that if I click here, I can change the color of the light to whatever I want. And all of these different objects have a variety of different options that are associated with them. Don't worry about that. We're only going to be looking at one of these things, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. So the last thing we're going to talk about is, of course, we have this window right here. The controls are pretty similar to Blender in terms of looking around. Right now I have a mouse, and I am using my scroll wheel to pan, and I'm using the left clicker to move around. If I double click on anything in this window, it'll zoom me into that place, and that's usually how I navigate these scenes. Great, so let's go ahead and add some sound into here. So before we do that, let's just go ahead and press this play button. If I press this play button, you'll see that you can actually move around as the character in the scene. You're actually testing out what is going on inside of this Unity scene, which is pretty cool. If I press play again, you'll see that we're just back to here. And this is the difference between the scene window and the game window. The game window is showing us what our player is seeing. The scene window is just showing us the entire scene and allows us to navigate it. Great. Whew, that was a lot. Let's get into the fun stuff. So, just like in Blender, Unity allows us to be able to add shapes, objects, sounds, whatever, in. And the easiest way to do that is to bring our mouse over to this window right here. And I'm just going to right click, and I can go to 3D objects down here and add a cube. Hey, look at that. Got a cube. I'm going to name this Sound Cube. Wonderful. And let's double click on Sound Cube, and wow, we have a Sound Cube right on top of our player. Maybe not the best thing, so I'm going to move it to the side a little bit. I'm going to zoom out, maybe move it a little bit further away. And right now you'll see that there is a view tool, which just allows us to move around the scene by grabbing. We have a move tool, we have a rotate tool, we have a scale tool, which makes things bigger. Don't worry about these other tools. You can easily access these tools by pressing W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. I don't know why they didn't just use the Blender convention, but they didn't. And now if I go into my game, you'll see, hey, there's my cube. It's here. I know it's here. That's great. So let's add a sound to this cube. I've clicked on this sound cube, and along with all of this stuff up here, there's an option for us to add a component. And this is the only time I'm going to ask you to look over here. If I go to Add Component, I can go down to Audio Source, and suddenly I'm presented with a ton of different options. What audio clip do I want to use? Don't worry about the output, mute, bypass, all of these things, but we now also have, hey, do you want to play this sound on awake? Do you want to loop this sound? We do. Do you want this to have a high priority or a low priority? What's the volume of this sound? What's the pitch of this sound? Is there a stereo pan? This, I think, is the most interesting, and the most important for us is this spatial blend. Do we want the user of this scene to perceive this as a two-dimensional sound that is already panned for us, or do we want the user to be able to pan this sound based on their relative location to it? That's what we want. So let's move this all the way over to 3D. We have a Doppler level, which is, do we want this sound to change pitch when it moves past us really quickly? Maybe not for us, but play around with this. It's really fun. And then we also have the stereo spread. Down here, you're going to see something pretty cool. There's a roll-off. Now, the roll-off is kind of a weird thing. The roll-off is essentially, how do we want the experience of walking up or away from this thing to seem like? I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, our max distance, and you'll see there's a line for our listener right here. In this logarithmic sense, which is most realistic to sound, we have this notion that it would be kind of quiet, 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 and then once we get closer to it, it would get a lot louder. Let's just see what that looks like in playing it. I'm pressing play, and if I scroll down while I'm playing, you'll actually see how far away I am. And hey, look, I'm getting up, I'm getting up, I'm getting up, I'm getting up. But we have no sound that's associated with this just yet. So let's go ahead and add a sound. In my folder, I have a sounds folder already. And I have these example stems, and I'm going to just bring this female reso pad in. But you'll see I've lost this, so I just need to click back on my sound cube. And now I can just drag this over and bring it into my audio clip. I can also just click here on this circle and find it like that. Great. Now we can actually test what this sounds like. And here we can see the listener. Great, that's pretty cool. But if I want to change this roll-off, I can go to like a custom roll-off, I can take a Bezier curve, I can mix this kind of spatially depending on how I want this to sound. In fact, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll make this like that. And yeah, I think that's the kind of roll-off I want. In fact, I'm just going to add another sound. So I'm going to Command Copy, Command V. Now I have two sound cubes. Let's move this one over here. If I highlight both of them at the same time, you'll actually be able to see both of the influences of their sounds. So we have some overlap in the middle, but not overlap over here and not overlap over here. That's pretty cool. If I go to Sound Cube 1, I don't want it to have the same sample, so I'm going to take this reso pad, I'm going to bring this in here, and let's see what this sounds like now. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I am now mixing it based on how my character walks up to it, which I think is pretty fun. Let's go ahead and add another one. I'm just going to duplicate this by pressing Command D or Command Copy and Command V. And now we'll see this one, you know, similar kind of thing. Maybe I want them to overlap kind of like that. I can also look down and say, okay, there's like a middle point where they're all overlapping. It's kind of neat. Maybe I want some drums or maybe this thin pad. Okay, great. Let's see how this sounds. that's pretty fun. So you're already starting to see that just by adding these cubes or by adding, different shapes, it doesn't have to be these cubes, it could be things that you make in Blender. I can add sounds in a really intuitive, interesting way. And by playing around with the roll off, I can actually get these things to overlap in a really systematic way. I really encourage you to play around with these options too in terms of reverb, Doppler, because these are all things that you can add Bezier curves to too. Whoa! Are you trying to say that I can dynamically and spatially change all of these aspects right here? So depending on how far or close I am, I will get a different effect? Yes, I am saying that. Okay, so this is neat, but I bet you're saying to yourself, I don't really want cubes. I want to add something from Blender. So I'm going to go into Blender. This is a bodega that I was working on. There's no texture on it right now. It's just a bodega. It's got an awning, and it's got a door, and it's got a window. I'm going to go ahead and delete that and delete my light. And now all I have is this mesh. And if I go to File, Export, great, I've got a bodega. I already imported this earlier, so I'm just going to delete that. But I'm going to, it's like, Duncan, where do I put this bodega FBX? Well, I want to put it in the folder of my Unity project. So for me, I have it in this folder, SoundBytes Unity Template, and I can go directly into my Assets folder, and I'm going to go into my Models folder and put it in the houses along with your houses. I'm just going to say Export FBX. If I go back into Unity right now, and I go back into my Assets folder, you'll see that in the Houses folder, the bodega is now added. Delete this just for a second. And if I drag it in, I can now just add it into my scene. Whoa, okay, that's pretty cool. That was really simple. But what if I wanted to add a texture to this or something like that? Well, I can not only just bring FBXs into here, but I can go ahead and I can add any image to these. So I'm going to take apples from, well actually I think that's an AVIF. Let's see what JPEGs I have. I had a spaghetti one earlier that I want to use. Where's my spaghetti one? Ah, perfect. My spaghetti one. Great. If I don't have any material on this, and I don't think I do, I'm just going to go over and take this image, and I can drag it onto here, and whoa, look, I have a spaghetti bodega. Now, of course, this is going to look different depending on how you UV unwrapped this and all that kind of stuff, and that's something for like a totally different video. But now that I have this bodega, I can just go and add a component to it. I'm going to add an audio source. I want to make sure that this is 3D. I can do all the same things that I did here. I'm going to loop this, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in some drums. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I can easily add sounds, I can easily adjust the parameters of these sounds, and then I can easily add Blender meshes in here and add sounds to them. One of the things that we're going to look at in class is the fact that while we can do this, we can also do more complex things like have these sounds influence the shape and size of different meshes in our scene. So this scene that you'll be seeing is going to be blank except for the player, which you'll be able to move around with and add all these things just like we did. But if you go into scenes over here, you'll see that there's two other scenes that are attached here. One is an example scene that shows some of these, and I'm going to go ahead and play that. And again, we have some like meshes that have sounds, but these meshes are changing their size based on the amplitude of each every one of these sounds. We also have a zone in here where we turn audio on or off for inside of this zone.
This is all inside of a virtual three-dimensional world. This is a reductionist facsimile of experience. This is all inside of a
And the only difference between this scene and the one that we were just looking at is I've started to use scripts. So in this case, if I click on this capsule, for instance, it still has an audio source, but I've used one of my custom scripts that I've attached for everybody, and I've attached the audio source and said essentially, what do you want to control the size and shape? What do you want the minimum scale to be, the maximum scale, the sensitivity, and the smoothing? And all I need to do to be able to do that is to go into this scripts folder and drag one of these scripts onto my object. So if I made a square or a cube, I would drag one of these scripts on. We'll talk about this in class. And then the last example I want to show you is if I go over to scenes again and I click on the house scene, now we have all of your houses in here, which I brought in. These have all of their textures that you created easily put onto them. So remember the process that we went through to put these textures on them. It can easily be brought into Unity as long as I'm taking the actual texture and dragging it onto the house that I want. With all that being said, in this example, I've made it so that each and every one of your houses has a different tone on it. So Catalina's house has a tone of 100 hertz, Ella's 200, Finley's 300, Ryder 400, Kobe 500, Lou 600. And so in this case, we have a harmonic series for an arbitrary scale that I've created. And if I move around this scene, I'm actually going to be changing the mix of the harmonics. Meaning I'm going to be changing the wave shape. So this is pretty complex in what it's doing, but the execution is pretty simple. I've broken down the harmonic series, and I've scattered it around here, and I've set it up in such a way that they all overlap just a little bit. Whoa, look at that. So the experience of listening to it is different everywhere you go. Now, this is exactly what we were doing before in terms of adding sounds to cubes or meshes or objects. We're just spacing them out, and from that, we're getting some really complex behavior. So I hope you found this interesting. There will be a Notion page that goes through all of this, and we'll talk about this in class. Super excited to see you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.